G'day, listeners, and welcome to another episode of the Scouting Australia podcast, powered by Australian Property Scout Buyers Agency. I'm your host, Sammy Gordon, and today, guys, we are back for another Q&A episode. And as usual, I have my standard co-host who likes to come up from the south and ask me these questions. Jimmy, mate, welcome back.
G'day, Sammy.
How are
G'day,
you,
listeners. I'm very well.
good to have you
I
back.
love the Q&As.
I love these new settings.
I love the setting. It took a while to set it up, to be fair. But
weren't even involved in
you
it,
did
mate, so-
spring it up on the producer last minute, which is not surprising.
Help to remodel the room.
However, it is always good to hear from the people,
It is.
the lovely listeners of the podcast, clients, and everyone who loves what we do here at Scouting Australia and APS. So, yes, why not?
Here we go. We're
Give
back.
the people a voice.
Mate, and between two ferns also sits the man mountain, Mr. Teeuwsen. Mate, welcome back to the show.
I was going to say rose between two thorns, but I'm literally between two ferns. I love it.
You
Yes,
are.
You are.
It's a famous podcast. We'll take it. But
It
yeah,
is.
good to be back. I'm keen to unpack some of these questions. Some of them are pretty curly. That always.
So
get
you've
sent
seen
in.
them pre?
No, I haven't. But usually in a Q&A, a lot of them are pretty curly. So
I was about to roast you then for-
I'm pretty keen.
Is
to
this
see.
the first Q&A that you've actually sat on, Luke? Have we done one before?
I think you've
No,
done one.
I've done a
haven't
few.
you?
Yeah, a non-don was a good one.
Oh, we did the one
I'd be
with when a non came in.
Yeah, a non came in. I had to be security in case
That's right.
Sammy kicked off. But
How's the year started for you, Lukey? You going well? Everything's all good?
Yeah, we've been really good. Chatting to a lot of clients that have had really good results last year and getting back into it for
Yeah.
the year. So, yeah, it's going to be a massive 2025 for sure.
And I know we're talking about Q&A, Sammy,
Yes.
but Lukey never ceases to surprise us. And just before the show, he was running us through a book, a kid's book that is
Yes.
actually in the pipe works. Is that a word? Pipe works?
Works?
Yeah.
I don't think
Pipeline,
it is.
pipe works.
Yeah,
Pipeline,
in the
yeah,
works.
pipeline.
But somewhere in the pipe.
Yeah.
And it's very impressive, Lukey. So
Thanks,
we're
mate.
just
Appreciate
planting the
it.
seeds out there for all the dads out there. Lukey got two young boys. I think it's brilliant. The producer loved it. We're putting in some pre-orders.
I actually was surprised Sammy liked it too. So if
He didn't give it a lot. He didn't give it a lot.
I
But
just thought it was going to be longer. But then apparently that's a long one. So I was like, I don't read too many kids' books.
Sammy's
I
not
enjoyed it,
used
though.
to long ones.
I felt
So,
like I was in the book. I was in the book. Yeah, you're very small. Normally you can't be. I don't even know you're there. I don't even know you're there. So moving on, because today's all about being nippy, zippy, exactly like Jimmy, in and out. That's how we're going to be today, guys. And apparently we've got 10 questions to go straight off the mark.
Let's get
Jimmy,
into it.
Let's go.
All right. Question number one, Sammy.
You done already?
And Lukey.
He said that before.
What are your thoughts on prefab grannies? This is from Sam. How does it compare in terms of cost and effort versus traditional granny builds? And he's looking specifically for the Vic market, where it's a less than 60 square meter size. So
Anything you wanna
prefab,
throw in,
prefab
Lukey?
grannies.
It's a really good question. It depends on the spec and what you're getting. Like there's ones that come from Amazon now. You can pick them up for 15, 20 grand and they come as a flat pack and you unfold them. And then you got the ones that are built on site and transported there. So there's a wide range of prefab, and prefab is pretty much covers anything in that space. But yeah, I think they're a good option in some cases. It's not something that a blanket rule would work on every site, but there are a few cases, we've been speaking about this before, where there's options to actually put one on site, and essentially like if it's a future development site or you intend to hold it for a period of time, but it may not be a permanent solution where you're going to hold that long term. You put one of them on site and hold it for that period of time with the extra cash flow, and then potentially remove it from the site and move it elsewhere,
Okay.
and then develop later. So there's a few different options. It would depend on the scenario.
Yeah, 100%. Look, man, I think, most people at APS and Scouting Australia, you would know that we've kind of, veered away from the residential cash flow route and going down the granny avenue. I think, look, prefabs, if we're still talking about it from that perspective, prefabs, they have their place. They are typically a much lower cost production to put it on there. The one thing to note is depending on the price point that you're going in at, it's actually quite hard to get bank funding for it. So if you can't get bank funding for it, you probably want to go for quite a cheap product. But then at the same time, like, what's the longevity? What's the actual game plan for it? Would you be better building a fixed product that is going to stand the test of the next, 50, 70 years, something like that, however long you've potentially got left in the tank yourself? Do you want, or is a play here to potentially get something on that's going to give you cash flow for the next 5 or 10 years? get rid of it in 5 to 10 years, maybe sell the granny flat off to someone else, and then sell it as a development site or develop it yourself, or whatever the game plan is. So there's a place for them. It just really depends, where you're at in your portfolio, what you're actually trying to do with it, what the longer term play is, how much better is the yield, how good is the construction if you are going to build it, and is it going to be a longer term hold. There's a lot to consider with it. If we then answer the second part of the question being around the Vic market, I'm not really a big fan of yields in Victoria as it is. So like to then go and do a cash flow play in Vic, all right, if you could build dirt cheap and allowed you to hold a decent property in a decent area and maybe neutralize out a bit of the cash flow for, 5-10 year hold period or something like that, maybe. But I'm not really a fan of them. We're not fans of yields, so to speak, in Vic. And do I think it's a good play? Not really. So again, man, it always comes down to individual property, what it's in the portfolio to do, even before we start talking about should we be building granny flats on them.
All right. Question number 2. This is from James. Robbo, we'll call him. Call him Robbo. At the APS Bootcamp, Sammy, you spoke about affordability metric as a key indicator of when to enter, stop entering, and exit a market. Is this an industry standard metric accessible to the public? Or is this something APS has come up with?
Yeah, this is it's an APS specific sort of product. There's definitely no metric that's the same as this externally. There's a lot of different actual layers we put on it. It's not just one specific thing. But yeah, man, it's effectively it's something that we cooked up. It's a metric that we track very closely, both priming markets before they come in, when we actually enter a market, while we're tracking a market in terms of how soon until we're going to exit and stop buying in a market, and then how soon until we're going to exit and potentially sell out of a market as well. So no, it's definitely something that we've cooked up personally. And yeah, we've been working on it for literally the last couple of years, and we are constantly refining it, tweaking it, adding, just working on it all the time to make sure it's stays as relevant as possible to each different market. Because again, different things overlay onto it as well. And yeah, man, and pretty much we have a base model that we use for it, and then we amplify that in terms of each market depending on what big factors are going on in that location as well. So it's definitely not something that's open to the public, man. It's something that we hold pretty close to the chest. Lukey?
It's pretty much like the Colonel's recipe, but it's Sammy's secret herbs and spices. So, but yeah, it is something we look at very closely. It's a pretty cool formula when you look into what
100%.
it actually comes from and actually how it correlates across all markets in Australia. So yeah, it's very
So buyer
cool.
beware. If you're using a buyer's agent that doesn't understand this metric or doesn't have any ability to assess affordability, then you're potentially making a massive mistake on the way in, but also not knowing when to leave.
Most BAs don't even track it or advise their clients on it anyway in terms of the exit. Most buyers agents don't even believe in exiting because they haven't built portfolios, retired themselves, etc., etc. But also most literally just they're buying in a certain area for whatever reason. It could be a data set or whatever it is, but it's not. Yeah, we use very different metrics and indicators. We use different ones compared to a lot of different people. And yeah, man, it's worked very, very well for us over the last couple of years.
All right. Our next question comes from Sally. Question 3. Gentlemen, how do you navigate tenants that are renting the main dwelling on a property and you're planning to build a granny flat? Do you offer them anything different during the build of the granny, i.e. lower rent or compensation for them to allow access to the property for the builders? And does the property manager need to update the lease agreement if that's the case?
Jimmy, I'm going to flip this back on you because you've had so much experience in this space as well. I don't know if you thought this might have been coming. I mean, I'd love to know what your experience is and how you've dealt with this. Because you build in multiple states too.
Yes. So essentially, if I think back to what I did, I think it was the timing that certain properties had slightly different strategies. So first of all, if you're just buying the property and we were planning to build a granny flat, we would put the tenants in the front property on a 6-month lease, right? Knowing that we would get all the plans and permits done and approvals ready to start construction.
In circa 6 months.
In circa 6 months. So it just gives that nice clean exit because if the front tenant has an issue with it, then we can get rid of them and they can move on. And the new tenant, by the time the new tenant comes in, we've already fenced off the area so that they know what they're leasing, right?
Yeah.
So it's a very specific boundary. So that's one strategy. When that actually does happen, though, I remember previously I would compensate the tenant at the front. Might have been like 10 or 20 bucks a week potentially.
It's
I
always
think.
Relevant on the pricing.
Yeah, I
it's
think
always
so,
relevant on the
100%.
rent.
So compensating at some point. that would give them some level of comfort, knowing that we want to look after them. Yes, there is a little bit of inconvenience. They do have the area fenced off anyway, so it's not the construction doesn't go for that long with the granny flats. What are we talking? 3 to 4 months?
Depends on where the build is. It depends.
Back then, I think it was
back
roughly,
then it was 3 to 4 months. Yeah, when we go to WA, depending on the builder,
yeah,
we're talking 9
yeah.
to 12.
So some type of compensation just in the efforts of doing the right thing by the tenant. I'm sure if you really wanted to be a hard ass about it, you could probably get away with something that wasn't as friendly. But you want to look after your tenants.
Yeah.
So offering that definitely was an outcome. The last thing is, at the moment, I'm exploring doing one in WA. And I've had a tenant in there previously. I am looking at potentially doing a granny flat. So the next lease that I've just put in place now is a 6-month lease. Purely because I want to explore this option in more detail. I want to have the option to this tenant for them to leave and do the exact strategy that I just mentioned, so that if I do need to get a new tenant in, there's not going to be any conflict.
So there's so many things, and man, they're all great points there. And obviously, as you can tell, guys, Jimmy has had his fair share of granny builds and gone through this process and everything as well. And I think one of the really important things to know is you need to understand what your laws are in your different states as well, and what you're allowed to do and what you aren't allowed to do. You need to understand those really intricately, so you don't sign something like a 12-month lease even when you start a build, because what you got to remember is like a lot of tenants do realize that it's part of the property, and realistically, it is part of the property. The idea of fencing it off first, as Jimmy's saying there, which a lot of the time can actually work really well if you end a tenancy or a tenancy finishes. You vacate the premises, you then fence it off and start building after it. A lot of the time, you can actually effectively say that you've done a subdivision. It's not actually the same property. You're doing it like that, or you can literally tell them the correct thing. And it kind of does depend on where it is and which state it is too, and which council, because there's some councils in certain states that it actually is a dual lock strata subdivision that you can do on these things. It actually does create a new lot as well when you're doing it. So it really does depend where you are and what you're doing, but so often that is actually the cleanest way to do it. Do it like that. A lot of the time, my preference is to do exactly what Jimmy's saying there, vacate a tenancy or have it vacant before you start it, unless you've got an excellent tenant that is genuinely okay to do it. But what we found is even sometimes when that's the case, when the construction starts, that great tenant can sometimes be like, nah, you know what, my peace and serenity is gone, which is understandable. I'm not happy with this thing, so they try and call a halt to it. And then it can turn into a shit fight. So the easiest way that we found to do it, as much as we've tried to help so many tenants with it before, is we literally, I like to vacate it and then start a new lease while the construction has started and is already commenced. Because then people can't say, oh no, you got to stop all the rest of the stuff. It's like, mate, you already know what's underway. This is already under construction, everything, and literally you can sell it as to the tenant as a fact that it's a completely separate property.
Yeah.
And the key to that is fencing it off separately first.
Yeah.
So yeah, man.
And just to answer that final question, I didn't update the lease agreement. I think it was just an agreement. I'm not sure if that was.
Well, you don't
to do
update
it.
a current lease agreement, like you know what I mean, like.
If you're compensating them.
If you're compensating them, you still don't, because it's effectively like a reduction in rent that is applicable. Now, if they don't uphold their end of the bargain of allowing access, well, you don't withhold the amount of rent. Like they
Correct,
still owe
yeah.
you that certain amount of rent. So that's where it's almost like a gentleman's agreement between parties of allowing it to go ahead for a certain reduction in rent. But I think it's an interesting thing, because if for anyone that has made the mistake and then you're about to start a build and like the tenant's like, hang on a second, no, I'm not happy to do this. I'm not happy to allow you to do this, and you didn't get prior permission, and you're about to start and you've got 10 months left on a lease, you could be completely up shit creek, because a builder could smash you with multiple increases in payments during that period because they haven't been able to start. So sometimes, and I've been sort of semi-stuck in this situation before, where a property manager re-signed the tenant on a 12-month lease when it was supposed to go to periodic. This was a couple of years ago, and I had no avenue around it, and I had to just say to them, well, what are you willing to take as a reduction so we can start construction? And it ended up being like $100, $150 a week. Now, most people are like $100, $150 a week as a reduction, or I can't even remember what it was, but even if it was $150 a week, and that build got done in 6 months as opposed to starting in 10 months. In 6 months, okay, so over the course of a 12-month window, to paint the picture on this, $150 a week is $7,800, I think it is, for the course of 12 months. Chop that in half, you're at $3,900. Now, if you can get a tenant in there, for 10 months earlier in terms of the build even starting, but then how much did you save by not having the build, increases in costs, plus, you're getting it finished probably 6 to 12 months earlier as well, and all the additional rent that would come in and be able to put the current rent back up. sometimes it's the game you got to play of, okay, a mistake was made or like whatever. And in that scenario is actually, I rang the principal, I go, mate, you got to go in with me on this because this is bullshit. This is your employee's mistake. He did go halves with me on it. And then, got it done, significantly faster, got it done. Tenant was happy in the front house because they had a serious reduction. Got it done quickly,
Perfect.
bang, all the rest of it.
All
So
right.
sometimes, like, again, mistakes can happen or problems arise. Okay, what's the solution here? We can cry, carry on, do all the rest of it, or we can wait 10 months because we don't want to give a $100 a week reduction. But what's going to cost you more?
Yeah.
Cost first return analysis, everything, solution-based thinking, solve the problem, move on.
All right.
No, I think
All
that
right.
covered it all.
Moving on. Question number 4. This is a Lukey. This is not you, is it, Lukey? You've been writing into us.
Not that I know.
Well, there was
All
a
right.
James and a Sam so far as well. Who's picking
Who's
these questions?
picking the producer? Insider trading.
The next one will be Kelly.
At least they have
Luke,
last
this
names
is-
on them. So.
This is from Luke. Sammy,
What's
if
the
I
last
sign
names?
on,
They're all Fugazis.
if I sign on with APS, will you strategize and look at my current portfolio that I've bought without APS? I'm mainly wanting to sign on for commercial properties, and I do have other commercial properties already in the portfolio. So I want to know if you will give me advice if these are good properties and whether I should hold on to them or sell them. That's the first part of the question. Do you want to answer that first before I go?
Yeah, 100%. So, like with that, 100%. So, nothing really changes when a client comes on for commercial, especially if they're wanting to do the, the whole thing and whole kit and caboodle working with APS. 100%. Like Lukey and I strategize with clients on commercial all the time. So do the other boys as well, Paulie and Nay. As of right now, a few other boys obviously deep in training for strategy roles, roles within APS as well. And they've all got commercial in their portfolio as it is right now too. And so they've all got experience around it. They've all got training with me on it deeply as well. But I think someone who's already got an existing portfolio, they're either more than likely at this point in commercial going to be working with Luke or I on this. And 100%, we're obviously happy to have a look what's in there. We always do it, man. We always assess what a client's got in their portfolio, whether it is resi or commercial. There's heaps of clients that I've got these days and Luke would be the same, that already have commercial in the portfolio as well. And man, we strategize around it, and this was, going back 12, 24 months ago, as to whether, things should be kept or moved on from portfolios too. So without a doubt, 100% happy to strategize on it and then move forward from there too.
All right,
Lukey,
perfect.
anything you want to throw in?
Yeah, the biggest thing is it comes back to purpose-based investing. Like we always look at the purpose of the asset, how it's been performing, is it achieving its purpose, and what it's in the portfolio for.
And what his forecast is moving forward to.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
So you can't, especially when we look at growth versus cash flow and all those sort of metrics, a growth property that's not growing is not achieving its purpose. So, we can apply the same sort of logic to cash for deals like commercial, etc. So, absolutely, we review that sort of stuff and plan it out from there.
All right. Lukey's second part of his question, though, was, Sammy, you've also mentioned that when buying commercial property previously, you didn't recommend lower price point commercial around the 500 to 700K because it was of a lesser quality. However, now you are saying that you are buying from 500 above. So he's curious, have things changed?
Yeah, 100%. So there's been certain markets and certain asset types. Now, the important thing to note with commercial is there's so many different asset classes. Okay, and so it's not just like resi of you just looking at a house and then a location, all the rest of the sort of thing, and everything sort of fits into the same criteria. When it comes to commercial, different asset classes go through different cycles even in themselves. So different locations will go through cycles, and then different asset classes will go through different cycles. And there's been a lot of different asset classes that have actually come back to a really interesting point in terms of buying it and putting it into the portfolio because they've become undervalued for what they are again right now. And a lot of them are, there is good quality assets, once again, sitting there between the 500 to a milli. I think the important thing to note on that, and probably the comments that I was making back then also, was the difference in quality and asset type as well. So, and the other thing to note is a lot of the time when you do buy a lower price property, even like in commercial, I'll still say the same thing right now. A lot of the time you will get a tenant on a lower lease on a lower term lease. So the one thing to note with properties that are, $500,000 to $700,000, sub $1 million, a lot of the time you will have lower, shorter term leases. They might be a year, 2 years, as opposed to when you start going 1 to 2 million plus, you start going $3, $5, $10 million sort of assets. A lot of the time your big anchor tenants might sign 10 to 12 year terms. Or they might sign 10 to 12 plus, there might be a 10 plus 10 year lease, you know, things like that. As soon as you start going over, and you can still get it sub $1 million, but they're harder to get and they're not as common. And there is more turnover typically in your $500 to $1 million markets. You start going 1 to 2, 2 to 5, etc. You start going your 3x3s, your 5x5s, because typically you got your bigger businesses that are more established and they don't want to move on. When you got your smaller businesses in your smaller office spaces, warehouses, you know, all this sort of stuff that's at that lower price point, a lot of the time it's an in-between of them going to another thing. So they maybe don't want to share office, or they maybe don't want to, you know, go into a warehouse, like the very small warehouses, you know, the almost like storage sort of size, so the next size up. But then the business grows, so then they go to something a bigger asset as well. So it's something that we always factor into the equation. That being said, the vacancy rate on a lot of those style of assets right now are also quite low. So even though people might turn over more frequently because they might, you know, whether the business is downsizing, upsizing, whatever it is, they're a bit more of a fluctuating asset from a tenancy perspective. The vacancies right now are also very low, so we can still re-tenant them very quickly. Now, the important thing to weigh into the equation is when we used to say this stuff, especially 12 to 24 plus months ago, man, I was achieving net yields in residential, you would know this personally, stronger than commercial, stronger than a lot of people were getting in commercial for similar priced assets. So if you could do a 5, you know, combined of house and granny flat at 5, 6, 700,000 in a good, strong growth location that we knew was also going to perform from a price growth and rental growth perspective, and get a similar 6% plus net yield on that style of asset, for me, every day of the week, I was preferring that asset because I knew I was going to get the growth on top. And so that's where the real differential has come in. And that's where, again, when we discussed it in the poddy when commercial was released, we discussed it at the summit. That was a big change that came in, and I saw that coming in late 2023. The strong yield compression and how much price growth was coming through, and the available locations that we could actually do granny flats, and cash flow deals, unit blocks, duplexes, all these sorts of things. They were dwindling, and that yield compression was coming in. So we had to make that transition, and it made a lot of sense to do it, man. So man, just moving with the times and what makes sense. And what made sense 2 years ago, 12 months ago doesn't necessarily make sense now. What makes sense now and in the next 12 to 24 months may not make sense in 5 years. So man, you play the hand you're dealt as an investor, as an intelligent investor, and you just keep moving forward.
Yeah, great. You've actually answered Jono's question, which was, with residential cash flow deals being wrapped up, was this the forced decision to get into commercial, which was a bit of a pivot?
Yeah.
But the second part of Jono's question was, will you ever get back into resi cash flow deals?
Yeah, man, they'll always have their time in the sun. Like residential will come back to a point where it bottoms back out in a market as well. I look at, you know, stuff that I was doing house and grannies back in Sydney, man, in 2010 to 2013, like deals that could have been done. I didn't have the cash at the time to do them. Even through to like 2015, you buy houses for 300 to 400,000 and build a granny on them for 100 to 150 grand. You know, all in for $400,000 to $500,000. They're worth like 1.2 mil now. But there will come a point in the cycle where they bottom back out and they make sense again. It'll happen in all locations, but it's just a matter of time, man. And things have got to bottom back out. And that's why, like, for cash flow deals, if I bought them at a certain price point, a certain time, and I've made a lot of money, like you've had as well, like deals that we did at 8, 9% yields when we bought them. And then now they're sitting at 11, 12, 13%. You know, they're assets that you hold in the portfolio forever. But would you then go and buy that deal now and get yourself a 5 to 6% yield, on, like gross yield on a granny flat deal? That makes no sense. Anyone out there right now doing 5 to 6% yields on granny flat deals in residential right now, it makes no sense. The yield is not there. 5 to 6%, you can pretty much get that for a growth property with no granny flat. Ride the growth, and when the time comes through and it's a correct decision, exit that deal and roll that into commercial with a 5 to 6% net minimum. You know, we're not talking gross in resi. We're talking the net in commercial, which is a significantly better outcome than what you can achieve right now in almost all residential markets for cash flow.
I love that. Anything that I think you nailed that one, Sammy boy.
Happy with that.
All right, mate.
Next question from Maddie. Question 6. We're in the second half, gentlemen. If I do additional works on my property, do I have to go and get a new depreciation schedule?
Lucky?
The answer would be yes, because a quantity surveyor would have to assess the...
The answer would be that it depends. It depends on the level of works, because a good accountant, especially a good property accountant, depending on the level of works, will be able to, if you have all the receipts and everything from what you've done, they can obviously use that and then depreciate it accordingly. What they can't do is walk into a house and depreciate it the way a quantity surveyor will do it. So it's a split test. It's a split answer because it depends on the extent of the works. If it is an extensive renovation,
Maybe
then,
50, 100 grand.
oh man, even like doing kitchens and stuff, when you go to that sort of extent, you probably want a quantity surveyor to go in there and pick out the plant and equipment, and versus structure, whatever the bloody, whatever the thing is, and go against each other and weigh it up properly to have it split up properly. Most accountants probably wouldn't touch that. But again, it depends on the extent of the work. So the smaller the works and the more straightforward, well, here's a painting quote, here's a flooring quote, and here's an oven, or like, the basic works for repairs or whatever. An accountant can probably touch that. But you start going into the 30, 40, 50, 100, quantity surveyor, it's a different story. So it depends on the level.
Okay, so just for people's context, if it's like a 10 or 20K reno, you should speak to your accountant and get their advice.
Regardless, if you've had a depreciation report done first,
Yeah.
you should speak to the accountant regardless as to, well, is there anything in the depreciation report we can just scrap immediately and do an immediate write-off? And that's where when it gets bigger, you want your depreciation expert to come in because they're going to be able to come in and give you the double, and the accountant's a good property savvy accountant to go, bang, we can scrap all this, and then we can start writing off from here as well. Sorry to steal your thunder there, Lukey. Anything else you want to throw in?
No, I'll be with that. Yeah, essentially, like, any time I've seen someone with a depreciation schedule and they do a massive improvement to the property, like the old one is obsolete to some degree, so they have to get it checked, whether it be with the accountant or a quantity surveyor.
All right.
I think one quick thing to throw in as well is just be strategic with your depreciation reports. You know what I mean? Like if you're going to hold a property for 3 to 5 years and you're going to flip it, if you're going to get one at the very start to write everything off, you don't need another one on the way through, because when you sell that thing, you're going to be able to claim what you put into that property regardless. Like just have it as a capital expense on the back end.
Yeah.
If you're talking about something that's like we're talking about house and granny, it seems to be a lot of house and granny questions here. You get one done at the start and then maybe 2 years later, or maybe you got one done 5 years ago and now you're going to renovate the house and build the granny. The answer would definitely be yes, because the quantity surveyor would be able to, and the accountant would be able to use the original one and then go in, depreciate the house now with the reno and depreciate the granny together, and you're going to get a great result from something like that. So it always depends, man. The accountant's always the one to just to pose the question to, depending on the extent of works.
That makes a lot of sense. Question 7 from Steve-O. Is there a better time to sell a dud property? Should I wait until the end of the lease so I can get a possible owner-occ buyer, or just sell it when I can? It's a dud property.
Dud property. How long's left on the lease, Steve-O?
Steve-O hasn't disclosed, but he's probably thinking around 6 to 9 months.
6 to 9 months changes things. If it had been a month or two, I probably would have potentially started to do the process anyway, because by the time you go through advertising, selling, and actually getting it settled and move, you can do vacant possession anyway. If it's a dud property, it's not doing anything and it's costing you a lot, you've really got to weigh up the opportunity cost. So if that property is 20, 30, 40 grand negative and not growing, if you hold that for an extra 12 months, it does nothing. It costs you 30, 40 grand and you miss out on 6 or 9 months of growth in a new market. So for me, if it is not doing anything and you don't see potential in it and it's costing you money, then I would potentially look at cutting the losses and moving it on, because that 6 or 9 months, you probably might, let's say you got an extra, 10, 20, 30 grand selling to an own occupier, that you're going to cost yourself that and holding costs and maybe 50 or 100 grand in a new market that is actually moving. So that's my thoughts.
I think the last point he made there is probably the most important one. It depends on the variance between selling to an owner occupier and selling tenanted. So if you're selling for 6 to 9, in 6 to 9 months, and you're potentially going to, and it's like it's a 50 to 100 grand variance, then you got to have a good look at, like, okay, well, will I make that somewhere else in a different market? So everything that Lukey said there, for transparency, is a cost versus return analysis. Every single decision and every single point he made there is a cost versus return analysis on that particular investment and what velocity of money could do somewhere else. Because there's going to be a process in terms of selling it. And if there is 9 months left on a lease and you're going to wait that long, get it cleaned up, stage it, sell it, we're talking about 12-month turnaround here. So if you're going to lose, if it was a 50 grand difference, and again, cost versus return analysis, if it was a 50 grand difference and it's 50,000, and people might be like, I'm not going to lose the 50 grand, I'll wait and sell it in 12 months. But what if it's costing you 20,000 a year negative? Okay, well, there's third. Now we've dropped to 30 grand. And what if the market's going actually sliding backwards, or like we're in a stagnant position? Everything has to be weighed up in this scenario. If it's 10 to 20 grand and it's 9 months, you sell it. You know what I mean? It's an easy decision. When we start talking a bigger number, and the bigger the property, the bigger the value, the bigger the owner-occupied demographic there, the bigger the potential variance here. Every single thing needs to be done, cost versus return analysis. And even in the sense of, where are you at in your journey right now? Do you need to sell the property? Is it going to be 50 to 100 grand difference and you can't do anything else? And the market's just going to flatline and do nothing else? Or is it 50 to 100 grand difference? The market's going backwards. It's maybe slightly increasing. You can do 2 other deals while you wait for this thing to do its thing. Every single thing needs to be weighed into the factor and into the equation before you make any decision on this. So there's so many different layers and levels to it. And yeah, exactly like Lukey said there. All those things just feed into cost versus return analysis on if it's the right decision personally for the individual.
I'm going to give a bonus answer to Steve-O, and it sort of goes into the selling aspect. A lot of people come and they say, oh, I'm going to wait until it's vacant and then I'm going to spruce it up a bit so I can sell it off to an owner-occupier. I usually get them to speak to at least 1, 2 or 3 agents in the local market and say, well, what can I sell it for as is? Versus what could I sell it for if I did 10, 15, 20 grand work? If that 10, 15, 20 grand work is not going to give you a return on invest of at least what we usually say 2 to 1 or if not 3 to 1. Like if you're putting in 15 or 20 and waiting 6 or 9 months plus the reno to get it done, like you shouldn't be just getting an extra 20 grand out. So if you can sell it for the same price as is now as to what you can do renovated, you got to weigh up that cost analysis as well.
One thing I actually remember seeing, and I've actually seen this a fair bit, and actually it triggers in my mind back to young Jakey McGregor when we did his story at the start of last year. He was holding on and wanting to do these different things to the property, and he's like, oh, well, if I spend this extra money and do these extra works and everything, I'll make this extra amount of money. But he didn't take into the equation that the market was actually deflating. The heat had the market and it was turning. And the extra 6 months that it took him to do the extra 50 grand's worth of work, he actually ended up selling it for like another 50 grand less. So he spent an extra 50 grand and sold it for 50 grand less because the market came back like 10% in that time frame. So imagine like how that cooks you from that perspective and making that incorrect decision. This is why it's so important to everything needs to be factored into this equation. It's like everything that we've spoken about here. If you're thinking about selling a property right now and you can't sell it for top dollar because it's not vacant or all these other things, or you're thinking about doing the works like Lukey said there, call the agents, speak to different things, rewind this question that we just asked here and go through and write down every single question that we just asked, analyze that against your situation and that property in your portfolio. That will give you the answer. It's as simple as that. The answer will be clear at the end of the cost versus return analysis for you and that property in your portfolio.
Would the property, not the property manager, would the agent be able to tell you the difference between selling it to an investor or selling it to they would,
of course.
But wouldn't they
give you a range?
Yeah.
They wouldn't have a vested interest to say, no, you should sell it now because they want to get the listing and just get it done?
Well, of course, like that's something that you have to be wary of from that perspective as well. But what you need, like the thing is, you're not asking them, what could I sell it for in 9 months? You're asking them, what could I sell it for in this condition? What could I sell it for renovated? Just don't tell them how long's left on the lease. Easiest way to get around that.
Got it.
You just don't even need to tell them. And then you say, what could I sell this for tenanted? And then what could I sell this for vacant? What's the preference here? And then they'll give you the answer pretty clearly on that as well, where he might just say, man, owner-occs are the most dominant market. You want to make sure we're selling it vacant. If you haven't told them how long's lease left, how long the lease is left on that property, they're not going to give you a vested interest answer. They're just going to give you that direct of what's the best scenario.
And realistically, agents should know their market like the back of their hands. The really good ones that you would sell out of a market with usually are very, very good at what they do a lot of the time. Yeah. And they may say, hey, mate, I just sold one 2 streets over and 3 investors missed out on it and they're waiting for the next one. I've got 3 people I can pit against each other and see what I can come back to you. Or they might flip it and say, hey, I've got 4 really, really motivated owner-occupiers wanting to be in this suburb or be in this area. They've just missed out on a property that I had 3 streets over. I could market it to these 4 people and get you a good price. You know, a really good agent should know that very well.
What you probably find here as well, the way Lukey and I talk about this is, and this is why it's such an exit is such an important piece of what we do as well, because it's all well and good to build a portfolio and do all all the rest of it, right? But an exit is such an important piece of it. And you can see how much analysis we put into each deal that we look to offload as much as each deal that we look to pick up. And there's writing between the lines there, because if you read that properly and look into what it is, If you make a $50,000 to $100,000 positive decision, now think about it. If you do that over 10 properties, we're talking an extra $500 to $1 million in your pocket by making the correct decisions here. So that's why everything has to be analyzed as much as something you're buying, as much as you're selling something. And that's why, you know, I've been actually working through very closely with my assistant in terms of what's coming through to end of leases, what are we looking at, speaking to different agents about these things, what works need to be done, if anything, do I need to sell them vacant, what's coming up, end of leases, all these sorts of things. So a lot of decisions I'm making this year is actually based on things coming up to end of lease and what needs to be worked on and not before I take certain things to market. And man, if I get literally, if I sell 10 properties this year, those decisions will literally each property minimum make me probably 50 grand per deal. Even if it was 20 grand per deal, 10 deals, that's 200,000. At 50 grand, that's 500 grand. You know what I mean? Like, that's such a massive variance and shift in this thing by getting it right. So you have to focus as much on this as you do it on the entry. It's so important because again, those little variances, you know, which it could be a little 10% difference on these exit price points, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 that you could be pocketing extra per property.
Steve-o, a lot of gold in that one, gentlemen. Well done.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Very, very good.
Thank you, Jimmy.
It wouldn't be a Q&A, Lukey, if we didn't have a question from Anonymous.
Yeah, I love it.
This brethren, I can't, better not pronounce where this anonymi came from.
King Kong.
However, this is question 8. What do I need to do to work directly with Mr. Sam Gordon?
You wanna answer that, Luke?
Anon has gone straight for the jugular.
Why is Anon asking me this?
Because Anon just, they like the hard-hitting questions. Being very direct.
Never.
So, Lukey, can someone work directly
Anon
with
cannot. No Anon can.
with the
I
bull
can,
shark
I can
himself?
simply
What do you
answer,
think?
no Anons are allowed to work with Sam.
Can anyone?
Well, no Anons, absolutely not.
So what do they need to do, Sammy?
So for me personally, I only work with mentoring clients these days and a very small handful of clients that I've worked with for many, many years. A lot of my time goes into the research piece. It goes into, you know, managing the BAs, still a little bit of obviously deal sourcing, and then you know, and then obviously working with those specific clients, man. You know, both the mentoring and the very small handful from the OG days. So, mate, the only way in these days is through the mentoring application, which if we have a summit, you know, this year, it'll be at the end of this year. That'll be the only intake for the year. And I probably will just leave it the same thing, whether it's a summit or not. It'll probably be a mentoring intake end of the year through School of Property. So you got to be a School of Property student, got to be obviously working with APS, and then, you know, apply for the mentoring at the end of the year.
And also, is it fair to say you got to meet a certain criteria? Like, there's no use coming to you if they can only do one deal for the whole year, because they're not going to get the value out of it, right?
Yeah. You're better off working like the boys, and it's like School of Property, you'll learn so much, and then working with the boys, you're going to learn a heap as well, and they're going to strategize your portfolio and everything. And especially from now until then, like we're in Feb, you know what I mean? And we're talking about recording this in Feb, and we're talking about potentially, you know, the next intake being in probably November.
Yeah.
You know, because the last batch was selected in November. I'm not doing it again anytime soon. So yeah, man, there's like so much you could do in that time frame to then be able to walk in the door with a good little underfoot, you know, before we kick
And
off.
is it fair to say, I mean, for a lot of people listening out there, if you were working with one of the other strategists in the team, it's not as if they're doing a completely different strategy to what you'd be getting from Sam. Every strategist is an extension of Sam.
Yeah,
Have been
100%.
trained personally by Sam. Are investors doing exactly the same thing that you're doing? So it's not as if you're missing out by working with someone like Lukey or Paul or Nay or any of the boys.
Yeah, 100%, man. Like, they're all super skilled, big portfolio. Every single one of them in the top 1% of investors themselves, or a lot higher than that too. So, man, I've got every confidence in these boys being able to do plenty. Some people just like to, you know, obviously work with me. But yeah, man, the other boys are more than capable of helping each and every person in their portfolios.
All right, we're nearly there, gentlemen. Question number 9. This is from Matty J. When you reach the debt reduction stage of your portfolio, do you recommend carrying some level of debt across your cash flow properties? Or do you aim to clear the debt to achieve the highest amount of cash flow for passive income?
Lukey, mate, I'll throw this to you first.
Well, it depends on what you're after. Like, obviously, if you're retired and you're not really going to go and continue to scale the portfolio and you don't, you know, have use for that cash, then I don't see really a reason not to have, you know, a lower LVR, you know, somewhere 5, 10, 20, 30%, maybe max. You're still going to get a very good result from a passive income point of view. Obviously, the lower the debt level, the higher the passive income that be generated from that property. It'd depend on the scenario. Like, are you retired and you're winding down from investing, or are you wanting to step back from work, maybe drop from 5 days to 4 days or 3 days, or your wife stops working, for example, and you need a bit of passive income to bridge that gap, but you're still going to continue to invest. That having that 20 or 30% of debt on that property would potentially give you some cash to continue to go and invest, but while still sort of balancing that cash flow position. So there's a few different variables there. But
Depends on your window, right?
Yeah,
like
correct.
how long your runway is.
And where you are in your portfolio and your age.
Okay.
Are you winding down and you're pretty much just passive income and you have no plans to invest again? Then yeah, it's a different sort of kettle.
What about you, Sammy?
Yeah, man. Obviously, Lukey's bang on point from a strategy perspective, and I think the only variance here to throw into the equation with that mix as well, we almost always strategize around getting a client's portfolio down to about a 20 to 30% LVR position, and that we should be hitting their cash flow targets at a 20 to 30% LVR position. Now, the really cool thing is that over time, inflation eats away debt. Your cash flow grows, the portfolio value grows, all the rest of it is all growing, whilst your debt is becoming less and less important. Now, over time, you might also decide to pay a little bit of that debt out, or you might just let inflation do its thing and dwindle that thing away to next to nothing in terms of actual dollar return position as well. So everyone's going to be different in terms of whether they ever want to fully paid out. I personally have no issue carrying a certain level of debt. You think about it, right? You build yourself a $5 million portfolio and you carry 20% worth of debt. And that's $1 million. $1 million is a lot of money to pay out. But a 20% LVR on a high-yielding $5 million portfolio, 20% LVR is nothing. Everyone looking at it from that metric would be like, holy shit, that's amazing, right? Nothing. But $1 million, you look at $1 million and it looks like a lot. Let's go to the next step. What about if you're talking about a $10 million portfolio? But you're sitting there with a 20% LVR again. You're talking about $2 million worth of debt. People might look at $2 million and go, holy shit, $2 million worth of debt. Yeah, it's a huge amount of money, which means it's a huge amount of money to try and pay out. But a $2 million worth of debt on a $10 million high-yielding, high net cash flow portfolio is nothing. Absolutely nothing. And so I think when you start looking at it like that and realizing that it's going to do the heavy, everything will do the heavy lifting for you in the portfolio, man, and especially you think about it down the track. Let's say in a 10 to 15 year window, your portfolio doubles to 20 mil, from 10 mil to 20 mil. Your cash flows do the same thing. Now, let's remember, that's all relative to buying what it will buy for you in today's dollar, right? But let's say your debt level stays at the 2 million. What it effectively means is you will have half the amount of debt to pay back, if that makes sense. So even though the debt amount will be the same amount that you have to pay back, let's say you just kept rolling over interest only, it would still be the same amount that you pay back. But the actual dollar value weighted against your portfolio is only half, because your portfolio is now worth twice as much and your cash flow is now twice as much, but your debt level is still the same. But your dollar, in terms of what the cash flow buys for you, is still the same as it was at 10 mil. But remember, the debt is still sitting at the same position. So I hope that makes sense for people in the sense of, and then let's say it doubles again. And let's say, you build that portfolio at 40 and then at 50, it goes to the 20 mil value and your debt still stays at the 2 mil. And then let's say at 60, it doubles again and it goes from the 20 to the 40 mil, but you've still only got the 20%, the $2 million. That's only a 5% debt level. And that's the thing to weigh into the equation. But remember, back 20 years ago, 2 million was a huge amount. Whereas at this point, 2 million in that equation, when you've doubled twice, is the equivalent to 500 grand in today's dollars, which 500 grand is a lot more palatable to pay out on a 10 mil portfolio, right? But in the timing of 20 years ago, in this scenario, it's 2 mil. So that's why, and that's the power of inflation. And that's the power of investing in assets that are directly affected by it and are growing and being active with your portfolio and building it the correct way and having a high cash flow portfolio. Because if you had a low cash flow, low net yielding blue chip portfolio at $10 million and you're carrying $2 million worth of debt, you'd probably be breaking even. Depending on how blue chip they were, you might even be negative. Let's run the scenario for half a second on that, just to keep running with this thing. I live in a $5 million house. I did the rent vesting scenarios, at the summit. I live in a $5 million house, cost $2,000 a week to rent that thing. It's $100,000 a year. You have 2 of those properties, right? That's your $10 million portfolio. That's $200,000 a year, gross, right? You got to pay all your other shit that comes out of it as well. But $2 million worth of debt at today's dollars at a 7% interest rate. For every $1 million, you're paying $70,000 a year. $2 million, $140,000, right? Now remember, we're only on $200,000 a year gross. Now say your running costs on that $5 million property, council rates, water rates, all the rest of it. Let's just say they're It's 20 grand a year, right? Per property, because it's an expensive property. All of a sudden, your 200 grand worth of income is actually only 160. And you've got 140 grand a year of interest costs, just interest. You're only left with 20 grand a year net cash flow, right? Because your cash flows on a blue chip asset like that are so low. But if you have a high net yielding asset, a high net yielding portfolio of, let's say, of 10 mil, and you're even just netting, say, a 7% net because you've built it through the cycles and it's grown, and that's just what you're yielding from that perspective. That's 700 grand a year, not 200. So 700,000 on your $2 million worth of debt at 140, even if, let's say, okay, and that's at net. Let's even say there was a percent of running cost there, or even if you're sitting at 5% net on that, that's 500 grand compared to your 140. But you see where there's a variance? And people talk about holding these blue chip assets for life or blah, blah, blah. Why do you pay that off? Like, it's nothing in comparison to what you can build with a high net cash flow portfolio. This is where people need to understand the idea and the premise behind these low yielding blue chip assets are spouted by people who have never done what you want to do. Or if they've done it running a business that makes a couple of mil a year on the side. Because no one can afford to build that portfolio imagine buying that, 2 of those properties at 5 mil each with a 20% deposit. You've got $1 million down on each deal. You're borrowing $4 million per property. There's no bloody benefit to building that portfolio. You know what I mean? And that's why when you really look at it and weigh it into that equation there, man, and you run those numbers and you run those scenarios, it's an absolute no-brainer. You know what the intelligent investor does? They build that portfolio, they have that cash flow, and then they go rent that $2,000 a week, $5 million asset off that nufty idiot blue chip investor that doesn't know what they're doing because it costs $100,000 a year to rent. And then they got $400,000 a year in net cash flow to enjoy it while old mate's still working because he's only got $20,000 a year cash flow.
Wow. That was a good little...
If any of that went over your head, rewind that and listen to that again, because that literally is why anyone that touts blue chip is a fucking idiot and doesn't know what they're talking about and has never retired from property. I guarantee you, because you literally write down all those numbers as I was saying them, write it all out, $20,000 a year net on that style of asset compared to 500,000, even at a 5% net return. You go rent that property off that idiot and you got 400 grand left over. Game on, let's go.
I think we just got our reel there, producer. That
I don't
was
know if reels go for that long.
Oh, that was a good one. It was a good one. Anything that I think he said it all, Lukey.
No, it was epic.
All right, guys.
That made so much sense to you, Bo, right? That makes so much sense.
No, it was
It makes
brilliant.
sense?
Absolutely.
Producer?
Absolutely.
Beautiful.
Brilliant. Sammy boy, that was an epic finish to the Q&A. I think
Mate,
we've
the finale,
nailed them all.
you got
and
me revved up.
You did leave, as always, your best work for the end.
Mate,
strong finish.
I play the lengthy game. I'm not in and out like you, mate.
Yes.
We were supposed to be in and out.
He
but
hasn't
I'm sorry,
let that-
I took it away from you.
He did not let that
took the in
first
and out away
comment
from you.
go.
We
Did
delivered
you
on
notice
the
that,
long
Lukey?
run.
He's held onto it this
He's
whole
held
hour.
onto it the whole time. But
Mate,
anyway,
that was man. I don't even know. I can't even remember what that question was about, but that got me started on that. But mate, I'm glad they asked, and I'm glad it led into that because I hope that gave a bit of insight into clients so they can really understand how they should build out a portfolio and where
absolutely.
it was about debt levels and
Debt
if you should leave
reduction
it.
on
And
cash flow
this is
deals.
where it flowed in of what Lukey and I talk about, what we strategize literally every single day with each
Yeah.
other, with clients. You get this stuff right, man. This is how you get on the stage, you know, in 2030, man. You nail this thing. Game
Because
over.
and just to give real clarity around that, I mean, you ran through a lot of numbers, and people should definitely listen to it because someone who owns those 2 properties that you mentioned or has $10 million in property, they'll actually think that they've won the game,
Yeah.
even though the numbers, when you really break it down,
It's an ego thing, man.
Exactly.
All blue chip is the ego.
Exactly.
Bro. I love where I live. It's an amazing house. Amazing house.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But like, is it a great investment? Fuck no.
But the assumption within society and the media, a $10 million portfolio at a 20% LVR with $2 million is the holy grail. You got $8 million worth of equity, but
You know what the
but
crazy-
that's
yeah,
what
go on,
is
go on.
wrong with Australia. Like, we are very asset rich and cash flow poor. A lot of our elderly citizens and people that have done very well, they've owned wealthy businesses, they've done very well with their lives. They are cash flow poor still to this day.
I'm going to throw something in here because people are going to go, yeah, but Sammy, what if they bought those properties for $2.5 million and they doubled to $5 million and all they had on it was, well, they still would have had to pay down some debt to get to that point, right? And let's say, but they're like, oh yeah, but they've had so much growth. It's like, yeah, okay, sweet. And all these idiots that say buy the blue chip and never sell. Okay, no worries. If you made that money on that deal and then you sell it and then go and build the portfolio I'm talking about, you'll get this cash flow return as opposed to holding that asset. And this is where these people make those mistakes and they hold on to it from that perspective. Like, oh, you never sell. Mate, you never sell, you never fucking retire. You got a 10 mil portfolio, 20% LVR, making 20 grand a year. I would take half the portfolio at 5 mil, or you could, if you sold that 8 mil, let's say you paid 2 mil in tax, in capital gains tax. Oh my God, capital gains tax, mad. 2 mil, I just netted 6 mil. I'll go buy $6 million worth of property, or go buy 8, 9, 10 mil and take on a 30, 40% LVR. You're still going to be sitting at 300 to 400 grand a year cash flow, having changed scenario as opposed to holding that asset. So anyone that tells you, I'm going to reiterate this, I fucking love reiterating this. Anyone that tells you you hold property for life and you never sell, especially growth properties, ask them to show you the proof they retired from property, because I guarantee you they've never done it. They've never fucking done it, because that is a complete novice. They don't know what they're doing. They make too much money in something else to realize the way you win at property. And that is how you win at property. Whether you're doing it on 2.5 mil or you do 5 of those deals because you can actually afford to hold it at 2.5 mil for 5 deals at 500 grand that get you to that point, or 4 deals at 600 that get you to that point, man, that's how you win at this game.
Sammy, Matty J was innocently just floating a question about debt reduction, and the shark has literally done a backflip, double somersault. I know you're taking the kids
in the yacht, smacking the burley, APS Daily Mail. It's fucking on.
Lukey's taking the kids to SeaWorld. You should have brought them in here to see what it's like in the shark cage. They would have seen it firsthand, Lukey.
How do you know and learned about sharks all week? They drew a picture, but they didn't draw a sand.
Maybe minus the F-bombs. I don't know if they want to listen. But Tali would have been happy with that.
Mate, it just hammers.
No, you nailed it, Sammy boy. Well done.
Mate,
well done.
What a way to finish. I fucking
finish.
do a composed finish on this thing. Listeners, if you love the episode, if you know some fucking idiot that touts blue chips, send him this episode. Tell him to fast forward straight to this point. If you haven't left us a 5-star review yet, jump on there, leave us a 5-star review. If you're not following or subscribed to us yet, jump on your favorite listening platform, hit the follow or the subscribe button. Until next week, guys, big Lukey Teeuwsen, Jimmy Ibahraim, thank you for joining me in the studio, boys. It's another Scouting Australia podcast.